1. So this just happened yesterday, and I thought I would share this ridiculous entitlement. I work as a parcel courier for a company that deals in internationally shipped packages, and I was working my route as normal and was about an hour or two into my route in a particularly good mood, until I reached an intersection with the road Karen. For context, the street I was on is very odd. On one side of the road are residential houses and some buildings with businesses and apartments on the top floors. And on the other side was a state highway that has a lot of traffic coming off of the highway, as well as cars coming from other streets to get on said highway, since it's one of the only points of entry unless you want to take a detour. It's a big pain in the ass and the infrastructure is not ideal, but everyone knows what to do to ensure a quick and effective commute. The intersection I mentioned is somewhat narrow due to all the snow that has accumulated. Road Karen is on the left turn lane at the front of the traffic, and a semi-truck is making a left turn onto the street since he wanted to get on the highway. This is when the entitlement starts, as I have said. The road is narrow due to the snow, and the semi couldn't turn unless Road Karen reversed. I saw this coming, but the semi-truck driver made the mistake of thinking this POS would do anything a rational person would do and decided to make his turn. As expected, he couldn't complete his turn due to the Karen mobile. Every driver behind Karen started reversing because, people got places to be. And this semi gotta go. I shit you not, there is about 15 feet of space for her to go back up and allow this gentleman and his giant semi to complete his turn. What does Karen do? You guessed it, nothing. She sits there. About 15 seconds pass, and the semi-driver gives her a couple of honks because at this point, it's too late for him to do anything. So now his semi and his trailer are blocking the intersection, and traffic is starting to build up from people coming off the highway and people trying to get on the highway. The guy honks his horn longer this time, and this degenerate POS puts her car in park and goes on her phone. Luckily, I didn't have to turn at that intersection, and there was a way to maneuver around the semi at a green light, but it was extremely dangerous because people turning left couldn't see us trying to pass. So I get to the front, and the light turns red, leaving me side by side by Karen. I get out of my van, pissed as I see her tapping away on her phone and knock on her window. She looks up at me, and I yell and gesture to let her know that she has to back up, the truck has nowhere to go. Trailer Trash Granny keeps her windows rolled up and starts saying what I made out as, "I was here first," pointing and gesturing angrily to the ground. At this point, the semi-driver starts inching closer and closer to her to scare her back off, but she doesn't budge. I yell at her, this time, "He can't go anywhere, you have to back up, traffic is completely blocked off here." She ignores me, and I look to the semi-driver, throw my hands up, and shrugged my shoulders to let him know this bitch ain't moving. The light turned green and I went on my way. I made a few more deliveries, and about 10 to 15 minutes have passed since the start of this whole debacle, and went back to the street on the opposite side of the clog to see if it was resolved, and yep, you guessed it, traffic was completely clogged and screwed. I didn't even see the highway, but I would assume there was a line of cars trying to exit onto that street. Unfortunately, I didn't stick around and went back on my route, so I didn't see the conclusion to this idiotic situation. But I'm guessing the semi-driver called the cops. I wish I had to turn left at that intersection just to see the cops chew that toothless trailer trash road Karen out. Please don't be like this person and consider every other person on the road. It's been over 24 hours since this happened, and I'm still fuming and baffled. Thank you guys for listening to my rant. 2. There are two owners of the company I work for, John, and the other, Harold. Harold is a very crafty man. He looks like a Harold. Think my cousin Vinny with a head of glorious white hair. Harold would much prefer to trade services whenever possible rather than pay for things he needs. As technology seems to be the most elusive facet of modern life for those who remember black and white TV, my services are frequently the outgoing half of any given barter. Having graduated high school before the moon and footprints, Harold's factory warranty had long since expired, and as such he has a close relationship with various medical practitioners in the area. One of his favorites is another man of a certain age, who also has a predilection for the bartering of services. In this case, I had recently spearheaded a project at our office to install a new security camera and DVR system that Harold was absolutely blown away by, and which he lovingly described as the cat's behind to all of his friends, including the doctor in question. When it came time for another procedure, the doctor was more than happy to accept a new camera system in lieu of payment from Harold. And so it begins. The Event, Part 1. I'd place this around mid-spring 2018. I can't be sure as the seasons tend to blur together somewhat, but it was definitely between Rose's back and John's monitors, and I vividly remember the car I was driving at the time. Harold called me into his office to explain the scope of what I'd been lent out to do, and added that I need to order a security camera system similar to what we had, but without all the pomp and circumstance, because the doctor wouldn't need or use the majority of the features we had. Then came the budget for the project, which was about 10% of the number that was rattling around in my head, causing a modicum of unease. I found a suitable system, albeit from a vendor I'd never heard of, and placed the order, hoping against hope that it wouldn't be too off-brand. It arrived a couple of weeks later, and Harold passed it on to one of our electricians to do the actual installation, running the Cat5 cables through the drop ceilings, mounting the cameras and all that. My part would come later when it came time for configuration. Like a good library book, I went where I was checked out when the time came. I packed a go bag with network testing tools, my diagnostic laptop, and some other nonsense just in case, jumped in my car and made the less than 30-minute drive from our office to a beautiful mid-century modern glass and stone doctor's office in a nearby affluent suburb. A very confused but lovely receptionist retrieved the doctor for me, and I met the man who may as well have been Mr. Rogers. Much more hip Mr. Rogers, clean-cut and proper, but dripping with that English professor at a coffee shop vibe. The kind of guy you see rounding a corner down the hall and just instinctively trust. Beneath his white coat was a spotless pair of well-plated khakis, and a navy blue V-neck knit sweater that I bet had leather elbows to match his shoes. His smile was bright, his manner calm, and his small talk effortless. "Hey, thanks for coming. I'm excited to have this up and running. We don't need it in this neighborhood, but hey, peace of mind, right?" "No problem, Doc. Happy to be there. Can you please show me where they put the DVR?" Down a brightly lit corridor we went, past a row of windows overlooking the parking lot. "That your Beamer out there?" We chatted about cars for a moment as we arrived at a nondescript closet at the end of the hall. The Doc eventually leaving me to it with a cheerful wonder and "find me if you need anything, help yourself to coffee and snacks in the break room down the hall." Step 1. Open the user's guide, and my heart hit the floor. On the first page was a pictogram of a camera with a sad face, dripping, and a caption something like, "Fig 1. It is badly making if connections to camera is wetness." Fantastic. Splendid. This system is indeed very off-brand, praying to any given deity that I would need to reference this lovely piece of literature any further. Tasty foreshadowing. I dove straight into the menus. The HTTP is working, IP addressing seems okay, all the cameras are there, standard recording rules are fine, etc. Satisfied, I retrieved some appreciated coffee from the break room and wandered to find the doctor for the last part of the process, the interface software itself. It installed effortlessly on his office PC, found the DVR on the network, and all seemed well. I gave the doctor a quick crash course in live monitoring and playback, installed TeamViewer for future troubleshooting, made a note of his ID, and gave him my card to call with any questions. Wrapping up a textbook open and shut deployment, I mentally patted myself on the back while stowing my laptop back in his bag and wondering casually if the doctor might tip. When suddenly, just outside the half-closed door, I couldn't help but hear an exchange of words. "Really, Karen, I'm not sure why we need that at all." "What good is a security system if you can't watch it from everywhere?" The door opened and revealed my nightmare. Flashbacks from my time in retail hit so hard I was briefly dizzy. There stood the Karenest Karen to ever demand parley with management. Reverse graduated bob haircut? Check. Obvious symmetrical highlights? Check. Adorned with enough diamonds and gold to make the Maharaja blush, and wearing a blouse with more than my monthly groceries spent. Turbo Karen strutted into the room and extended her hand with the most sickly sweet and threatening smile I'd ever seen. "Hi, I'm Turbo Karen, and I have some concerns about this system. The doctor tells me you haven't installed anything on his phone, and I'm curious why that would be." She was his wife, for the record. "Oh, no worries. No one requested remote viewing, so I was under the impression this would be a local installation only. I'd be happy to take care of that for you." This was not at all an unreasonable ask from her. It was just outside what I understood to be the scope of work. With a twitch of the wrist and a jingle of a stack of bracelets, she produced a Swarovski-encrusted iPhone and thrust it into my hands. I got to work installing and configuring the remote viewing app. This took far longer than it should have due to the system's, excellent documentation, and culminated in a call to the doctor's MSP and have the requisite ports forwarded, allowing remote access to the DVR. Of course, Turbo Karen sat across from me with an expression growing more sour by the second, her dagger eyes digging progressively more deeply into my soul as I fiddled with her phone. Each time I paused to consult the worthless user manual, her phone would lock itself each time she unlocked it with a single jab and a sigh. Avoiding eye contact, I repeated the process for the doctor's password-free phone with significantly less difficulty, and we were off to the races. I was here representing Harold, so customer service had to be perfect. "Okay, Turbo Karen, here are your phones back. You guys are all set. The doctor has my card if you need anything else." She thanked me with a cold, jingly handshake and a facial expression that did not match her words. Before she could think of anything else to say, ask or do, I hastily collected my things and made my escape. It was over. Or so I thought. The Event, Part 2. A couple of weeks later, my phone rang, a number I did not recognize. It was the doctor, and he was whispering, "Hey, sorry to bother you, my man, but I really need your help." "She's watching me." "Watching you? Who's watching you?" "She sits at home and watches. She texts and asks about this and that. Calls my staff asking how many breaks they've taken. Accuses me of standing too close to the front desk girls. It's unsettling and disruptive. Is there anything you can do to turn these cameras off during the day?" Suddenly understanding why his phone was the one without the password lock. Honestly, I'm not sure. I've never tried to outsmart one of these systems before. They're designed to be pretty people-proof. Let me get back to you. Cue a few hours of frantic research and brainstorming. Does the wonderfully translated product documentation have any information on this? No. Can I program the DVR to shut off or disable remote viewing on a schedule? Of course not. That doesn't make sense. Can I set up access rules for this device on the network? No, their MSP was hardly willing to forward ports for me, and I shuddered at the thought of explaining all this to them. Can I put the DVR on a timer? No. Someone would have to manually turn it back on every night, and the hard shutdowns wouldn't be good for the drive. Then it hit me. I can put his connection on a timer. I rang the doctor. "Doc, I have an idea. It's probably not the most elegant solution, but I've got the stuff I need in stock. I can be there in 30 minutes if that's okay." "She's here. Can I call you when she leaves?" "Just send a text and I'll head over the second I get it." I explained the situation to Harold and received clearance from the tower to make it work. We shared a chuckle about Turbo Karen and about the delightful simplicity of my plan. My decision to take my to-go bag with me to lunch proved prudent, as the doctor called back 2 bites shy of the end of my burrito. "She's gone, are you free?" On my way. This time the receptionist skipped the confusion and led me straight to the closet where the DVR lived. I retrieved a programmable timer and a cheapo 5-port gigabit switch from my bag, installed them behind the DVR and configured the timer to turn on at 5:01 p.m. and off at 6:49 a.m. daily. Was that a jingle from the hallway? The glint of a diamond in my peripheral? No, I assured myself. You're being paranoid. I ran the network cable for the DVR through the switch, and expecting Turbo Karen to pop out from behind the door or materialize from any shadow, hastily packed up and went to find the doctor. "Doctor, may I see your phone, please?" The doctor handed me his phone and watched as I tapped the app for the cameras. Unable to connect to device. Perfect. We went back to the DVR closet. I clicked the manual override button on the timer, and the little switch flashed to life. Seconds later, the camera feeds presented themselves on the doctor's phone. Click the override once again. The lights go out and unable to connect to device. The DVR will still record to the hard drive while this device is inactive in case something happens and you guys need the footage. But remote viewing will only work at night when you aren't here. Tell Turbo Karen there was a software update for security or something. No problem. I plan to make up something about HIPAA regulations. Thank you so much for all your help. Come see me first if you ever have medical needs. Unlike Turbo Karen, the doctor's handshakes and facial expressions effortlessly matched his words. And it turns out the doctor is an excellent tipper, just not when Turbo Karen is around. 3. I live in a 20-story high-rise with around 15-ish units on each floor, so a pretty big building. I also live in a major city that, like many others, is in the middle of a housing crisis, so this place is packed to the gills with people and is super high traffic in common areas on a good day. We're also right downtown, so rent is absolutely astronomical in here on top of everything. I came out of my apartment one day and heard someone shout over to me from the elevator area. I looked up to see who it was and didn't recognize the person, so I figured she must be a new tenant that moved in recently. I asked how I could help, and this woman motions to the opposite end of the hall and said something along the lines of, "Hey, can you make sure my cats don't get into your apartment or the elevator?" I looked down the hall and saw 2 super cute orange cats who looked pretty young, maybe less than a year old, hanging out in the hallway. I immediately assumed, like any normal person would, that they must have made a run for it when the door was open, as can happen with pets sometimes in any building, and she was in the process of corralling them back into her unit. Of course, I agreed. Gave the little guy some quick pets. I asked if that was okay first, after I locked my door and went over to the elevator to leave. When I got a bit closer, I noticed the woman was taping a sign above the elevator button saying, "Please do not let the orange cats on the elevator." So I made a comment about how my pets can be cheeky little escape artists too sometimes. But we gotta love them. She then said something that confused the hell out of me. "Oh no, they didn't escape. I just live in one of the smaller units and they seem to be getting bored inside of my apartment. So I'm just gonna prop my door open whenever I'm home and let them hang out and explore out here. They're really cute. Everyone will love them. I'm just putting the sign up to make sure nobody lets them into the elevator. As long as people just shoo them out of the elevator, it'll be fine." I'm standing there silent, trying to process if what I heard was correct. Because who in their right mind would think they can just let their 2 cats casually hang out in a high-traffic apartment hallway, in a dog-friendly building no less, every day? Not to mention the fact that we live in one of the most high-crime cities in my country, and she's just chilling all day with her door propped wide open. She must have noticed the confused look on my face and added, "Don't worry, the sign I made here is only temporary. I'm just going to ask building management to print up a proper one with the building's letterhead. I'm sure they won't mind. The property manager is so nice." At this point, I'm still at a fucking loss and decide not to engage. So I smile and nod and wish her a good day, hoping this shit will sort itself out. Don't get me wrong, I love cats. Even though I'm allergic, I have 2 of my own and they're my babies. If it were up to me, I would be surrounded by cats at all times, but it would never for 1 second occur to me that it would just be okay to expect literally dozens of strangers to suddenly be responsible for my unsupervised pets all day. Especially because they're too bored at my house. Putting aside for the moment that not everyone is okay with having animals around and some people are allergic, the safety issues of every other apartment in this place having a dog, and the fact that 2 near kittens could very easily disappear into an apartment elevator or stairwell at any given moment, in a place where there is no hallway security cameras, sounds like a recipe for an absolute fucking disaster. This woman was 100% truly convinced that our large corporate property management company would have 0 issues with this, to the point that they would be setting up official paperwork to inform all of us that these pets are now the entire floor's responsibility. She was telling me this all so casually you would think she was talking about the weather. The handwritten sign was gone by the time I got home that day, and I have never seen or heard from that woman or her cats ever again. So I have absolutely no idea what happened, but I can only imagine that when she did call the property management company, she was laughed the hell out of there. I wish I could have been there to see management's reaction. 4. When I was much younger, I had the chance of living a bit far from my hometown in a semi-rural area, at some place with a nice green space, next to a very nice neighbor, with her own green space adjacent to mine. It was some closed neighborhood with a few common expenses for maintenance of the inner roads and such stuff, yet not with an HOA in the same way as in the USA, according to what I read on Reddit. There were just a few homes there, between 25 to 35. I can't recall exactly now, and everybody had an equal vote on issues regarding the common practices and issues. There was never any problem. Really, never. My nice neighbor was a lady in her 50s. She was very funny, witty, smart, really lovely. She had a boyfriend who used to be there from Friday to Sunday every week, and he was equally nice. Adorable people, the both of them, really. I always helped her with her green space, quite more than a garden, whenever I took care of mine, which was quite often. I didn't mind helping her with that, since her boyfriend wasn't able to do it. It wasn't that easy for him to do that stuff since he had some back issues, and was getting treatment for it. And for me, it wasn't a big deal. After all, the tasty stuff she cooked me and gave me, "Try this, tell me if you like it," was a recurrent sentence. It was the least I could do. Also, her 2 dogs were with me all the time when I was in her place, and they were adorable. Well, as it happens, one day they decided to move to some city quite a few 100 kilometers from there and get married. So she put the house on sale. Some people came to see the house, which was beautiful. So I was doing the usual gardening work at her place when the couple who later bought the house were first visiting. I didn't pay much attention, but I remembered afterwards it was them because the girl in the couple had a very distinctive voice and a very high pitch, yet not unpleasant. Her unpleasantness would show later, but not regarding her voice. Also, her husband was very much taller than her, like 2 heads taller. One day, my neighbor and her boyfriend said their goodbyes, left me with a few things to donate, the ones they couldn't take care of, some for me if I wanted. I didn't save for one great cast iron pan that somehow they wouldn't take, and left. I was sad to see them go, but they were chasing a good future life together, so I was also happy for them. Well, the new neighbors, the entitled neighbors, they got there one day, and I had been told beforehand by the realtor, so I worked a bit on their green space in order for it to look nice. The entitled neighbors didn't say hello, yet I didn't mind. They had their right to be less sociable than other people are, and unless they were annoying, I was okay with that. A couple of days after they moved, I was taking care of the grass in my property, cutting some dried branches of a tree, plum, and other things, and the high-pitched lady called me.
"Hey boy, when you finish there, you gotta come do some work here too. The grass is quite grown and we have more stuff to do."
I was a bit confused at first, but then I remembered that when they first visited, I was doing gardening stuff for my former neighbor, and that's why she must have thought it was my duty. I got close to her and explained to her that I was doing maintenance on my property, that I was friends with my former neighbor and about her boyfriend's situation and why I was helping her. She said,
Okay,
and went inside. A few days later, could have been 3 days, there was the monthly neighbors' meeting. After a few issues were debated, mostly about a few bumps in the dirt roads, both the entitled neighbors said they had an issue, and the high-pitched lady said that I was refusing to do my chores and that I should get reprimanded and not be paid in full. It was quiet and calm, and I was about to speak when another homeowner, who was aware of my relationship with my former neighbor, said, "He was helping his neighbor, that's it." I added that I already told her that and explained to her my relationship with my neighbor and her boyfriend, and that I thought I made it quite clear. The tall dude then said that when they visited the house, they saw me doing the gardening and assumed that it was included with the common expenses. So it could be said they bought the property under those assumptions. At that moment, I was quite amused because the whole issue was ridiculous. I told them something like this, not the exact words. After these years, I can't recall every single term. "I'm sorry that you thought my gardening came for free with the house. It came for free with the relationship I had with my former neighbor, and that's it. No one told you I would be working for you for free, or under common expenses. And your own assumptions are just flawed, I'm sorry." At that point, high-pitched lady lost her temper and shouted at me that I was disrespecting her husband and her husband's authority, that I was rude and a bully, an accusation without any truth, and that I was purposefully refusing to do their gardening. After her screaming show, there was a very, very long and uncomfortable silence. I had never witnessed anyone shouting in those meetings, which were very amicable and quiet. So I broke the silence and told her, "After what I'm going to say, I will ask my new neighbors to explicitly point out in which ways I was, according to them, rude and a bully. I would also like to know in which ways I disrespected her husband and his supposed authority. And also, which authority do they think they have over me? On the other hand, they are right, I purposefully refuse to do their gardening, and I will assure you that I will never do it. Not even if they want to pay for it." They shut up and left before the meeting was over. Yes, we, the rest, stayed a bit afterwards talking about what happened. It was impossible not to. And then I went to the entitled neighbor's neighbor, a nice old bloke, who invited me and a couple of other homeowners over. He lived on the other side of the entitled neighbors. He offered us cappuccinos, yay, or teas. He seemed to know a lot about tea. While there, I had this idea, and I told him, "Hey, I can come a couple of days a week for a little while to take care of your plants and trees, more like bushes really, and I can have cappuccinos here." He agreed. I had triple interest in this: 1, the cappuccinos; 2, angering the entitled neighbors, who will see I do some gardening for their other neighbor, the nice old bloke's granddaughter, who was beautiful, and I had already seen her around. It all went well. The cappuccinos were great, the entitled neighbors were furious, and the nice old bloke's granddaughter ended up being a good friend of mine and introducing me to a friend of hers, who would then become my girlfriend. Until she died only 6 months later, but that is another story. Oh, and I also had another interest: the nice old bloke's library. He had great books, and he lent them to me. 5. My aunt was one of 2 kids my grandparents had. My mother was the solar opposite to my aunt. She worked from the age of 12 in my grandfather's shop, never asked for anything, and eventually managed to start her own business. My aunt never held down a job till the age of 26, was constantly stealing from her parents, and was constantly in trouble. Despite this, my aunt was spoiled by my grandmother, and so were her kids. She had 3 kids from 3 different men, and her first husband was not one of them, if you know what I mean. Didn't matter what my aunt or her kids did, my grandmother would always jump to their defense. She never had time for my mum and her kids, unless it was to get something from us. The only reason my mum would visit her was because she loved my grandfather. My grandfather passed away in 2004, and a few months after, my nan decided to write up a new will. My mother and my aunt were both present for it when she signed it, so they knew what was in it. It made it so that when she passed away, her home would be sold and the money split 25% each to my mom and aunt, and the remaining 50% would go evenly to the grandkids. At the time, the home was worth more than £500,000, so it would be a nice little inheritance, but nothing life-changing. In 2010, my mum died after an accident, and did not have a current will in place. As she no longer had her business and was renting a house, she didn't have anything much of monetary value. The only thing that she was concerned about is what would be done at her funeral should she pass away, but had told me everything she wanted: the music, the flowers, the coffin color, and even what people were to wear at the funeral. She wanted people to wear bright, warm colors. So when she passed, my aunt and Nan took over all the arrangements and tried to undo all the things I'd told them. The songs were going to be songs I knew Mum didn't like. The flowers were all the wrong colors, and they picked a hideous coffin. With the help of my siblings, we were able to change a few of these things back to the way they were supposed to be, but the coffin couldn't be changed for some reason. And my Nan refused to let people come dressed as clowns, so it was all black. It was frustrating. After the funeral, my Nan had her will changed. My siblings and I were told by our aunt that she didn't have any involvement with the writing of the will, and our Nan told us that she changed it so that Mum's share would go to her kids instead. All good, we thought. After Mum passed away, my Nan just stopped talking about my mum. At first, we thought it was because she was still recovering from losing her daughter, but even 5 years after Mum passed, she still wouldn't talk about her. Even if you brought up a story about Mum, Nan would very obviously try and change the subject. Usually about how hard my aunt and her shitty kids had it. And if you went to talk to her about your own problems, she would somehow bring it back to my aunt. I had suffered a mental breakdown after my mum's death, so you can imagine how much it hurt to hear, "Well, they have it so much worse." In 2016, my Nan passed away. She had written down what she wanted to be done for her funeral, and it was basically all the same things she had picked out for my mum's funeral, and even the music to be played. I don't know why she tried to have her dress rehearsal funeral using my mum as a stand-in, but it was obvious what she was trying to do. So after a couple of months, our siblings and I were waiting to hear about the will reading. My aunt kept telling me, "Oh, it'll be another month before we can do the reading." I didn't mind. I wasn't fussed about the money, to be honest. But my oldest brother was hoping to use the money to pay for a honeymoon for him and his then-fiancée. And my younger brother was about to start uni, so it would be a hell of a help. Eventually, my dad bumped into the solicitor my grandmother had used to deal with her will, and asked what was happening. The solicitor let slip that the will had already been read, and that it left everything to my aunt. When my dad questioned this, the solicitor told him that my aunt had been present when the will was written, despite promising that she had nothing to do with it. When confronted, my aunt initially tried to deny, but eventually admitted to lying to all of us. She showed us the will, and it confirmed what we already knew. The house and all its contents were now my aunt's. This included my granddad's war medals. He fought in the Second World War. When I told her that he had promised them to me before he died, she said, "Well, unless you have it in writing, you have nothing in this house. Anyway, I already gave them to Clive." My heart sank. Clive was her eldest son, and the dictionary definition of a fuck-up. He'd been in and out of prison for stealing and dealing drugs. I knew that the moment that prick had got his hands on my granddad's medals, they would have been sold off. We looked into taking her to court over the will, but everyone we spoke to said that we probably wouldn't get anything out of it. She immediately put the house up for sale at close to £750,000. She'd pissed off too many people in our town, so she was going to sell the house and move closer to her daughter, who lives in a big city. An offer was made on the house, and she put down a deposit in a house near the big city. And I thought that was that. Here's where the karma comes into play. The people who wanted my nan's house had a survey done on the house to see if there were issues. And oh boy, were there. Turns out that the land the house was built on was way too soft for the type of house it was, and it was sinking. It has sunk about 2 centimeters in the 40 years my nan and granddad had lived there. But the sinking was accelerating to 1 centimeter per year. This meant that within the next 3 years the house would need some serious work or be knocked down. The new value of the house? $60,000. The buyers immediately pulled out, having not even put down a deposit. She couldn't buy her new house, but still had to pay the deposit on it. While this was happening, she let Clive move in with her into her house that she rented from the council. He wasn't allowed to live in any of the council houses because he had trashed every single one he'd ever been given. Someone reported this, and she was kicked out of her home. She was forced to move into my nan's old home, as she couldn't live anywhere else. So there she is, living in a crumbling house with her shithead son and her partner. She was stuck there for 2 years. Every time I saw her, she would try and start talking to me, and I would just ignore her and walk off. One time, as I was walking away, she screamed that my mother deserved to die for having a mental deficient, not how she said it, like me. In the middle of a busy street, someone reported her to the police, and she had an official warning from them, and was ridiculed on Facebook. Every time I saw her after that, she looked more and more miserable. Eventually, she sold the house for something like £85,000 and moved in with her daughter in the big city. I lost contact with her and the kids after this. I thought karma had been issued. Oh, but karma still wasn't done with her. I bumped into one of her former friends, and she told me what happened after she left our town. She moved into her daughter Sue's home, but they only had a 3-bedroom house and 3 kids. My aunt and her partner had to live in the smallest room in the house, while my aunt looked for a job and a home to rent. Even with £85,000, she couldn't afford a home anywhere. After about a month, my aunt's partner ran off after emptying her account. She was left stranded in Sue's house, not contributing anything because all the money she makes goes into bingo. Eventually, Sue and my aunt got into a screaming match, and my aunt said something along the lines of, "I should have aborted you." Sue immediately kicked her out of the house. So again, there's my aunt, in a city where she knows nobody, no money, no home. And the last bridge she had a smoldering wreck. Last anyone has heard, she was living in a caravan in the roughest part of the city, and she can no longer work because she's suffering early onset arthritis and can no longer move her hands. I know I shouldn't get joy out of something like this happening to another person, but it does bring me some peace as to what happened. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Idiots in the Wild, episode 101. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Please do poke the like button before you go, before they remove it. That's a joke, but, there's a new CEO in YouTube, so who knows what changes are coming. Okay, let's see. I don't think there's any shout-outs to do today, so let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is, what is a hobby that makes no sense to you whatsoever? Now, we're not here to insult people or make fun, but I'll list mine, and that is curling. It's considered a sport by many, but personally to me, I don't understand. Anywhere in my mind can I make a connection as to why that's fun. Well, obviously people do enjoy it, so they do it. But what are yours? Hobbies people enjoy that just don't make sense to you. Please leave your answers in a comment below. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.